I think it depends upon who the person is. I don't think that there will be a woman Prime Minister in my lifetime. In British politics, you don't just go from the bottom to the top. You climb your way up the ladder. We should back the workers and not the shirkers. I can't bear Britain in decline. I just can't. What I was very anxious to do was to have good debates in Cabinet, good discussions. You can't do that if you're handling everything with kid gloves. You've got to get down to the fundamental issues, and I must say that I thrived on debate.
For 11.5 years, right through the 1980s, Margaret Thatcher was the most formidable influence, the most powerful force in this mother of parliaments. From Westminster, that unique Thatcher voice, that Thatcher conviction radiated around the globe, exciting the analysts and the detractors, the fans, and of course the satirists. Well, tonight we examine with her that remarkable leadership style. What were its key elements? Also tonight, her attitude to New Zealand and the nuclear ships policy, and her attitude to the British Commonwealth in that decade where Britain took centre stage in world affairs, her undisputed star, Margaret Thatcher.
Margaret Thatcher was a towering colossus of her time. She transformed her country. She turned it from a country beset by an adverse image of itself, and she made it into a crusading world stage strutter.
I would say that if she had been born at the time of Winston Churchill, she would have done exactly what he did. God help the Germans if she'd been Prime Minister of this country.
She began to believe her own propaganda. She began to believe that she could walk on water.
She had this aura of power which she exuded, and I can understand grown men in her cabinet quailing because she had that formidable ability.
I'm sure it's a nice thing to be loved by everybody, but she worked out in the end that what she needed most, or what the country needed, was her to be respected by everyone.
She created a feeling of being a nation again, and she did, for a time, create the feeling that the decline had stopped. People liked that.
Lady Thatcher, your style, your leadership style was unique. How would you describe your leadership style?
Clear, decisive, purposeful.
Aggressive, confrontational?
I think where there are times when, if you're defending freedom, you have to confront those who are diminishing freedom. What does confrontational mean? It means you fight for what you believe against other people who believe something different.
Did you see yourself as a political revolutionary when you came into power?
Well, it depends what you mean by revolution. I was changing Britain. I was changing it, I hoped, to the very best of which it had been shown to be capable in the past, and on the very principles which allowed the talents and abilities of the British people to come up to greatness.
In New Zealand, following recent elections, we seem to be headed, or we could be headed, for a period of government by greater consensus, government by greater compromise and consultation than we've been used to in the past decade, say. What are the dangers of that form of government for a country?
The dangers are that you do nothing based on clear principle, that the beliefs which you put out in the manifesto and upon which you secured a majority, albeit only just, but a reasonable majority over Labour, as distinct from overall majority, are compromised, and therefore that the people who voted for you because of the positive aspect, because of the principles on which you believe, tend to be disappointed because you cannot put them into operation unless you're certain that on that vote you're going to get a clear majority.
But the other reason you seem, from your memoirs, to dislike, even detest consensus or compromise is that it is the enemy of clear government. Is that right?
Look, when I was first in politics, and for quite a long time, the word consensus was not used. It was agreement. Now, if you're setting out to chart a new course, which I was, in other words, to get rid of very high taxation, very high regulations, trade union reform and privatization, and a much more enterprising society, a much more independent society from the dependent culture that we were getting, then you have to have some stars to steer by. Stars that are still in the heavens and will keep their place, and you know they will. You can't steer by shooting stars. Now, do you see what I mean? You've got to have some principles, and people know and will put those principles into operation. You may compromise at the border, but the essence of politics is knowing the point beyond which you would not compromise. Giving yourself some latitude, but not everything.
Right, but you once described the idea of consensus, I think, to Sir Anthony Parsons, as those who advocated it as being traitors and quislings. Is that too extreme? Surely the people who advocate government by agreement or consensus are the real Democrats. These are the people really responding to what the people want.
Oh, no. I don't think the people necessarily want consensus. The people want strong, firm leadership and a clear sense of purpose and direction. That's what we provided. And just look, today I think there's so much summitry and so many decisions that, take Bosnia, for example, that all your heads of government or your foreign ministers go and discuss in the European community. And none of them is prepared to take action independently. Well, frankly, look what that did to Bosnia. We've had worse massacre, tyranny, than we have ever seen in Europe since the end of World War II. Now, you went, and there's always, if you go to get consensus, someone who says, oh, don't let's get involved, don't let's do anything.
So
do you think that's right? Do you think it was right to the people of our near neighbour to be subjected to the terrible massacre, tyranny, to have their hospitals bombed, their children's schools bombed? To watch a few Serbian guerrillas stop United Nations humanitarian aid, to watch them stopping the International Red Cross working? What has that got to do with being right? It was consensus, don't get involved. What principle has that got?
David Longy says some prime ministers take office, some take power. Which did you take?
Both. But the power I took was the power to reduce the power of government, to reduce the taxation, to reduce the ownership of government. In other words, to limit the powers of government, not to enlarge them.
Downing Street, number 10, the understated address of the Prime Minister of one of the grand old countries, seen this house of some of the most effective discussions and moments in modern history. And it was to this house, in the mid-1980s, that David Longy, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, brought his explanation of New Zealand's nuclear ships policy to the presence of the implacable Margaret Thatcher, one of the fiercest advocates of the nuclear deterrent.
The nuclear deterrent had stopped the Third World War because those who had the nuclear weapon knew its potency.
She was totally, absolutely convinced to the very bottom of her being that we were mad.
Relations between New Zealand and Margaret Thatcher were not always frosty. She came here twice. On the first occasion, in 1972, she was Education Minister in Ted Heath's government. It was one of the few trips abroad she'd ever made. She remembers seeing some schools in Rotorua, she thinks. She came again in 1976 as leader of the British opposition as part of a process of learning about the world senior Tories felt she should undertake as part of her preparation. Prime Minister here was Rob Muldoon, whose budget Margaret had described as short, crisp, clear and lacking Jabberwocky. But the cordial relations we might have counted on to protect our exports to Europe suffered a setback with the Longy government's nuclear policy. Margaret Thatcher's objections were fierce. The policy was a challenge to the British Navy. Britain could not maintain its role in the seas of the world if her ships were, like those of the Americans, denied access to friendly ports. Margaret Thatcher received the New Zealand Prime Minister at Downing Street. There were the usual friendly, smiling cordialities, but the rift was wide.
She was the ultimate cold warrior. She was the person that was going to bring the Soviet Union to its knees with her friend Ronald Reagan, and any chink in the mosaic of the Western structures was just anathema to her.
I did not like it at all. The only deterrent, final deterrent, as we have learned since the end of the war, to World War, another World War, was not strengthening conventional weapons. That had not stopped 2 world wars, fought, the 2 worst wars in history, fought with conventional weapons. The nuclear deterrent had stopped the Third World War because those who had the nuclear weapon knew its potency. And so long as we kept it strong, and so long as we kept our alliances strong, we didn't have a Third World War. Although the world was fractured into the tyranny of communism and the free world.
But David Longy
Kept us free. And I think for people not to help those who had in fact the nuclear weapons and who were therefore maintaining a peace, an uneasy peace, but a peace, did not seem to me to be a fair distribution of responsibility.
David Longy says that you never tried to understand our nuclear policy, that you never showed any sympathy for it. You made no attempt to do so. Did you?
I didn't show any sympathy for it because they were relying on us, not only to make nuclear weapons, but to have them and to see that they were transported around the world so that if sudden trouble broke out under the NATO arrangements, whatever those ships should have had on to go straight to their destination, in the event of hostilities, they had to have on board. And so those ships which needed nuclear weapons to carry out their duties needed to carry nuclear weapons. That was part of world deterrence. We did not say which ships they were, nor should we. And there were people who profited from that policy who took no part in the burdens of that policy.
You're suggesting New Zealand had not taken part in the burdens of that responsibility?
I'm suggesting that denying access to their ports for ships which were helping to keep the peace was not right.
She addressed me as though it was the Nuremberg rally. It was all go, you know, the handbag at will, and she would proclaim the truth of her position.
David Longy says that when he came to visit you at Downing Street, that you declaimed to him, that you addressed him as if he were in the back row of a public meeting. He said that you spoke as if you were at the Nuremberg rally when he went to see you at Downing Street.
If I might say so, that is very offensive, bearing in mind that Britain and the Commonwealth stood alone against Nazi tyranny for quite a time. And unless we had, it would not have been beaten, and the rest of Europe would not have been freed.
New Zealand was part of that, though, Lady Thatcher. Didn't a New Zealand Prime Minister deserve to be treated better than that when he called upon you? I expect other Prime Ministers to be able to argue their case as I can argue mine. What I am saying was that they were denied ports, were denied to us, although we had our ships in the Pacific, on their regular duties as part of the defence of the free world, as part of the deterrence against a Third World War. He says he did argue it with you, you didn't listen.
Oh, I did listen. I had no sympathy with the arguments.
There's a special factor about New Zealand, though, is there not, in that Britain
What
has
would
never...
have happened, please, let me ask, what would have happened if a ship was in very considerable difficulty and the nearest port was New Zealand, it was denied a port in New Zealand?
There's another aspect to the New Zealand policy, is an historical aspect, that Britain has never had nuclear testing of weapons gone on in its backyard. New Zealand has had that for 30 years. We've had you, the British and the Americans and the French testing either in Australia or in the Pacific, and I suppose that the nuclear ships policy can be seen in the light of that as worthy of some sympathy.
Look, nothing can alter the main point. The main deterrent to a Third World War, although we were obviously at odds with the whole of the communist world, which denied either dignity or prosperity to their people, was the nuclear weapon. I'm the first to know that without the Commonwealth we could not have stood alone.
We had seen the nuclear weapons, Lady Thatcher. We had them going off in the Pacific. We had the French doing it, the British doing it, the Americans doing it.
But without a nuclear weapon, what was to prevent a Third World War on conventional weapons? You get rid of a nuclear weapon, you open up the way to a Third World War on conventional weapons.
The trouble with that reasoning might be that some 40 million people have died since World War II with conventional weapons anyway, in conventional conflict.
Indeed, yes, it's not the trouble with the reasoning. It shows you that the wars are still fought with conventional weapons in localities. And you might get a Third World War in conventional weapons, infinitely worse, unless you had a nuclear deterrent.
It seemed to New Zealanders from the British reaction to the nuclear-free policy in the 80s, I think, is that as long as we sent boys to be troops for the front. As long as we sent frigates for the Falklands campaign, there was plenty of warm talk about the Commonwealth, but the moment we struck out alone with an independent foreign policy, we were given the flick.
Well, fortunately, Australia did not deny our ships access. Fortunately. Our ships could still go into Australian ports. But you still do not face the main point, as Winston Churchill said, do not give up the nuclear weapon until you're sure there's something better in place. There's been nothing better in place. And you said that any ships that may be carrying nuclear weapons couldn't come into the ports. That, in effect, denied the ports to all of them because we weren't going to say it. All right, that was your policy. We had no option but to accept it. Had everyone denied those ports, we could not, in fact, have necessarily carried the requisite nuclear weapons, and we could not have had the NATO arrangement.
But what do you say to New Zealanders who say, gosh, I thought we had a great relationship with Britain. We've sent our boys to die for Britain. We have young New Zealanders in graves all over Europe for Britain. And suddenly, when we said we're sick of nuclear weapons going off in our backyard, we don't want ships carrying them here, you gave us the flick.
Well, hardly. Hardly, if I might say so. No one fought harder for New Zealand in the European community than I did. No one fought harder for your access of lamb and butter than I did. No one fought harder. We always fought harder. But we thought that we might share the burdens of the nuclear deterrent. It was New Zealand's decision to decide not to. We had to accept that, and we did. But it seemed a bit hard.
Did our decision not to share the burdens of the nuclear deterrent affect our trade with Europe?
No, not in any way. Not in any way.
I don't think she was at all keen on Commonwealth ties. She regarded it as a kind of piece of vague windy rhetoric, and she despised windy rhetoric.
She treated the Commonwealth as her plaything in terms of political advantage.
Margaret Thatcher was continually at odds with the Commonwealth. In the 80s, no heads of government conference was complete without the biennial fight between Britain and the rest over sanctions against former Commonwealth member apartheid-ridden South Africa. New Zealand's David Lange, attending two of these international meets, witnessed Margaret Thatcher's merciless scorn for African leaders who opposed her and their arguments. In Lange's view, she shot down African leaders superbly. You imprison your opponents, she would say, I defeat mine. On South Africa, against the crescendo of voices clamouring for sanctions, Margaret Thatcher stood painfully alone.
She didn't particularly like the Commonwealth. It brought her problems. It brought her the problem of South Africa. It brought her a problem of race relations. It brought her a problem of relations with the black Commonwealth states.
She had a very interesting view of the Commonwealth, some of which I share. My own view of the Commonwealth is that it works very well, except that every 2 years they have a heads of government meeting, which is very destructive of the Commonwealth. Because in one place, for a concentrated period of time, you see all this motley collection of extremely incompetent people sometimes, hereditary people, confused people, military people, and the occasional Democrat. And it doesn't do the Commonwealth any good. And that was the view that she had it. She never thought of the Commonwealth as something that would enhance her in terms of absolutely identifying with it. But she did see the Commonwealth in terms of something that would enhance her image as a thruster for Britain and for principle. And she played that immaculately.
Lady Thatcher, the Commonwealth. You seemed, through the 80s, to be continually at odds with the Commonwealth over the prickly matter of sanctions against South Africa. You said after one conference, if it's 1 against 48, I'm sorry for the 48. Is that another example of a certain arrogance perceived about you?
No. It is a total and utter hatred and contempt for those who sit in 5-star hotels at Commonwealth conferences, determining that they will put on a sanctions policy which they know would create mass unemployment and starvation in South Africa.
There was already mass unemployment and starvation.
That's right, and they wanted to add to it. We run something called Operation Hunger, which looked after 500,000 people. And if you added to that, by undermining the economy of South Africa, you are throwing hundreds of thousands more out of work. It would not, if it did not work, you wouldn't get the unemployment. If it did work, you would have got the extra unemployment and extra starvation and hunger. Or I simply did not understand people who were doing that. Many other people from Africa went to work in South Africa because it was the best economy, because it was bringing up the education of black people and the qualifications, whether in university or in school leaving or in training. Industry was leading the way out of apartheid. I have no sympathy with apartheid, and I had no sympathy with people whose policy of sanctions would have thrown far more black people out of work.
Right, but
and I disliked it intensely.
But these Commonwealth leaders, Lady Thatcher, were black leaders, many of them, who'd thrown off colonial regimes. They believed the sanctions in the end served a greater purpose. There were black leaders in South Africa who wanted the sanctions to be tougher. Your own Foreign Office believed tougher sanctions would better Britain's interest in the long run. Only you knew best.
Oh no, my Foreign Office didn't believe that, and it was not operated by a Labour government in power either. And some of those black African countries intended, as they had always done, to use the transport through South Africa to get their exports to the ports and to get their imports from it. And they were hoping to put the burden on us. No. And after I'd had that pitched battle, only afterwards, one honest, really honest leader of one of the non-white Commonwealth got up and said, well, I hadn't the slightest intention of cutting my tea exports to South Africa. Not only would it put people out of, may have put people out of work there if they hadn't the possibility of handling goods, it put people out of work at home. I hadn't the slightest intention of doing it. And as I came, and we had a battle, both in the Bahamas, but particularly in Vancouver, what did I find? Masses of people seeing me after the way from the Commonwealth Conference back to my hotel saying, hang in there, girl, go on, hang in there, girl. And what were some of the people who were advocating sanctions doing, but putting up their exports to South Africa or their imports from it? Oh no, I sat and watched it. They just didn't work through what it would have meant to ordinary little people on the ground.
Longy says you were wrong on South Africa, but sincerely wrong.
Well, I would say I was sincerely right, and the acid test is now that as the election comes in, South Africa still has a strong economy. Had they had their way, the unemployment and the poverty would have been terrible.
Lady Thatcher,
How
if there hadn't been sanctions,
work?
if there hadn't been world economic pressure on that white regime of the Afrikaner, there might never have been change.
I totally and utterly disagree.
Why would there have been change?
It was a fundamental political change, and the apartheid, in the sense of opportunity, was going. The political apartheid was not. It was a political decision. Industry was training people. They were coming up. There are many, many small capitalists among some of the black people. They're excellent traders. It was, in fact, the modern world that was bringing an end to apartheid. They could not, in fact, have gone on with it, nor could they maintain what was fundamentally a totally wrong and repugnant doctrine. Good heavens, isn't communism totally and utterly repugnant? Did we attempt to have sanctions on communism? Did we attempt to have sanctions on the Gulag? No, there are many, many repugnant things, but the way you get out of them is increasing world trade and raising the standard of living, and then these things will start to collapse. And also because as we fought the battle of ideas against the communist world, we fought the battle of ideas against apartheid.
How do you rate some of the Commonwealth leaders you dealt with through the 80s? Indira Gandhi, you describe as high-handed. Rajiv Gandhi and Mulrooney, they bring a paper to you at a conference and you say you can't give it high marks. Kenneth Kaunda, you dismiss as self-righteous. Malcolm Fraser, you dismiss him. He wanted simply to strut the international stage and be an eminent person.
Will you notice that with many people, I balanced out some of these by handing them many accolades when I thought they deserved it. I remember Kenneth. I've known Kenneth for years. Kenneth did not exactly run a healthy economy in Zambia, I am afraid. They had plenty of natural resources, excellent soil, copper. He did not run a healthy economy. This is what happens when you run a socialist-type economy. And then there were food riots. And I remember arriving at that Vancouver conference and having my usual discussion with Kenneth. We got on very well together personally. And Kenneth saying, I had to fire on them, Margaret, I had to fire on them. I said, what do you do that for, Kenneth? Food rights. And he was greatly distressed. But you see, you've just got to run your economy on sound lines. And whatever you disliked about South Africa had the strongest economy in the whole of Africa. And there were more black people there qualified and coming up the tree. Not enough. I have no sympathy with apartheid at all.
Oh, she's magnificent. I mean, you've got to give it to her. She had presence, she had style, she knew how to comport. She was a person of enormous good physical presence and an aura of power which very few people can exude. And she worked at it.
She wasn't really a woman, was she? She was very aggressive in a male, an insecure male kind of way.
When she starts losing an argument, she will use it to her advantage at the final moment. If she thinks she's nearly got you, but she needs to use the ploy of being a woman, well capable of using the wiles of a woman.
Can I ask you a few questions on a subject that you've never enjoyed discussing, I think, about your being a woman in politics?
Well, it was not a thing that I could avoid.
No, I know. No.
Any more than you could avoid being a man in television.
No, I would like to be able to avoid it.
Well, you could.
Yes. No, I can't. I don't know anything else.
Well, you could just not be in television.
You once said you thought, very early on, you said you thought there would not be a woman Prime Minister of Britain in your lifetime. And I think you said to a little girl at one point many years ago, you thought the highest a woman would ever rise in Britain would be, politically, would be to become Chancellor. How were you able to give the lie to that?
Because the party voted me into power as leader of the party. Presumably because they were looking at it on merit, and presumably because they thought that I would, with the things I believed in and the performance which I'd shown as a cabinet minister, that I might in fact make a better fist of it than anyone else.
Were there any qualities of being a woman which you think you brought to the Prime Ministership?
I think, frankly, it was more personality qualities than being a woman. It may, just in view of the things we've been discussing, have been that one works out the practical consequences of one's policies down to what it means on ordinary families. And for ordinary families to a far greater extent, maybe than other people, but I still think that actually is not so much a feminine thing, as some people are very practical in their approach and do work out the practical consequences.
But despite you saying that you felt and you had feeling for the families who were the victims perhaps of some of the spending constraints and the unemployment, as the unemployment figures rose, you had a perception problem, didn't you? People didn't feel that you really had any compassion. Did you have trouble conveying that?
May I just point again, they re-elected me with an increasing majority. Why do you think that politics is about being popular? It isn't. It's about gathering respect for the right policies which show they were right if you give them time to work. Do you not have that larger perception? Popularity. I'm going into politics. I want to do policies that will be popular. Often popularity in the short term consists of handing out other people's money that you haven't got. It consists of knowing that in your own life you have to live within your income. In your business, you have to live within your income. In your small business, you have to live within income. In a farming, you have to live within income. But miraculously, when you get into government, you can spend other people's money which you haven't got and they haven't.
How do you regard politicians who want mainly to be popular, who want to do anything to win an election?
I have no respect for them at all. Yes, I do want to win elections, but I believe we won elections by doing what I thought to be the right thing and gave reasons for the right thing. And as I have said, it showed that that view was right.
You say that in the eyes of the wet Tory establishment, I was not only a woman, but that woman, someone of a different class. How did you deal with that, and how were you shown that?
I think I gradually heard of what some of them were saying, and then this penetrated to the media, and they told me. But one carried on doing the work one was there.
Well, what would they say about you?
Oh, there's someone I mean, well, never mind. They just informed me. They didn't agree with what I was doing.
They looked down their noses at a grocer's.
Well, no, there was a certain amount of they thought that might be the reason, but I thought there was nothing wrong with being Grace's daughter.
The grandees certainly looked down on her. I remember Jonathan Aitken made a joke when she became Prime Minister that she knows so little in foreign affairs. She thinks Sinai is the plural of sinus. And that meant that he never got a job. And there were all kinds of jokes like that. There was the story of her being invited by the Morrisons, aristocratic Tory family, former Chief Whip, the father, two sons in the government. And they invited her for a country house weekend to try and civilise this amazing force. And you know how the upper classes behave. Sunday morning, they're all abed snoozing, and Mrs. Thatcher, who can't sleep, gets up at 6 o'clock in the morning and goes out into the fields. All the security services are alerted. Bells ring all around the house. The Morrisons have got out of bed, and there's this manic woman striding through the field, and all the security men pursuing her, and nobody knows what to do. Do they fetch him back and say, have some breakfast, Margaret, sit down? So she shattered their weekend, and I think that was a typical of the Portuguese. They didn't understand it. Came from a different world, the small town world of Grantham, where her father had been a councillor, and she was strongly influenced by, I think, the small town virtues, which were totally alien to the aristocratic Tories.
We still have in our party some amazingly snobby people who come from backgrounds that have governed the Tory party for 1,000 years. So when the daughter of a greengrocer became the leader of the party, that is exactly how they treated her, and she was aware of it. And she killed every one of them.
What I was doing was like any medicine. It's not very nice taking medicine. It's tough at first. It makes you feel rotten sometimes. It takes a long time for the benefits to come through. But you have to take it if you become a fit and healthy society.
You were quoted as saying in the early 80s, the battle for women's rights has largely been won. Do you still believe that?
Oh yes, it has. But unfortunately, there's no legal barrier to more and more women coming into the House of Commons. No legal barrier at all. None whatsoever. The fact is that we still have comparatively few. I think all of us long for the day when each of us would no longer be conspicuous. But you also have to understand that for many, many women, they have a young family. They would feel that they couldn't just leave a constituency which was miles and miles and miles away from London on a Monday and come down to Parliament in London and not get back until early Friday morning with young children. They would feel guilty about it. They'd also feel that they would miss their children. And so you do go through a period when you simply cannot avoid and would not wish to avoid that prime duty.
Looking back on your political career, did your family lose out, do you think? Did the kids lose out?
No, I don't think they lost out. They were independent by the time I went into Downing Street, so it wasn't a question of them losing out in any way on being looked after. And I think that they also had a part of a family, and they also saw things they wouldn't otherwise see. But I'm afraid, as often happens, the children of any well-known personality suffer from the limelight, because they're in the limelight. Carol, as you know, my daughter, spent quite a lot of time in Australia, and then my son went abroad to America.
You are a grandma.
3 chairs, it's marvellous.
What would you like, Michael, he's your grandson, what would you like him to know about you as a political figure when he's 20, say? How would you like him to see you?
I don't, as grandma, who happen to have other jobs.
What are you getting him for Christmas?
I must ask his mother. Normally he gets so many toys that I would prefer, I'm afraid, as one's own parents did, to build up the savings a little bit, believing in saving a nest egg for the future.
She lasted so long because she was better than any of them. She lasted so long because she could deal with any of them and deal to any of them. And they did not have her presence, they didn't have her charisma, they didn't have her legend. I mean, with every succeeding month, she entrenched this ability to become totally paramount in their political structure.
She'd love to have gone on forever, frankly. And therefore, a group of people said, the time has come for her to go, we need a new type of leadership. And she went, much against the will of many people in the House of Commons, and certainly in the constituency parties. They were livid, and still are, that she was removed.
at last, this woman who'd never played the game, who'd always done the bold, defiant thing, actually listened to all the chaps around her saying, play the game, Maggie, time's up. And she listened and gave in.
It's a marvellous record. You won 3 elections. You never lost a vote of confidence in the House. Britain was walking proud on the world stage, was influential in nearly every matter of significance in the world. Why then did the party dump you?
I got more votes from the party than my successor did. I did not lose the majority of the party. As you'll see from the book, it was quite clear that I lost a number of my friends in the cabinet who hadn't the stomach for the fight. And so, if we couldn't carry on in the way which had done so well for Britain, the way in which had rolled back the frontiers of socialism, the way in which eventually brought down the evil empire of communism, then I couldn't continue constrained by something that I didn't believe in. You can't go back in life. You can't say if only. This happened after I had met the cabinet, after I'd seen people fall apart. They hadn't the stomach for the fight. Right, well, I always had the stomach for the fight. But I couldn't go on if I was going to be tied up with people who had, I thought, less courage than the times required. So there you are. Now, it's happened. And no point in living an if only life. Those 11 and a half years put Britain back on the map, on the world map. We were the lead country to roll back the frontiers of socialism, which means rolling forward the frontiers of freedom. And after I have left, country after country followed in privatization. Country after country. They would never have done it unless we'd had the courage to do it.
So if you wanted to put it simply, I mean, what was Thatcherism? Simply put, what was Thatcherism?
Simply put, Thatcherism was maximizing the freedom of the people within a rule of law and minimizing the role of government, but not having weak government, but strong in the areas which only government could carry out. Did I say sound finance? A strong rule of law. You must give good opportunity of education. You must keep a strong defense the whole time. And, of course, always a safety net for people who fell by the wayside through no fault of their own.
Should you be leader still?
I'm not leader still. There's no point in asking that question. I'm not leader still. I have accepted what happened. That's politics. The way politics works brought me into power. The way politics works put me out. And I had 11 and a half years in between which transformed the reputation and standing and prosperity of Britain and transformed her international image.
Was not being Prime Minister, though, for a time difficult to handle?
I accepted it, but I fortunately had absolutely no difficulty with filling my days full of political activity because the number of requests, the amount of correspondence, and the demands for advice, for lectures, for almost everything. And I was still in the House of Commons, and then eventually I went in the House of Lords, so I still have a forum.
But you have spoken, since you resigned the Prime Ministership, you've spoken with some bitterness of betrayal and treachery by your colleagues.
One moment, steady, in one connection only. And that was in what happened in that last day with the Cabinet. Now, otherwise, no.
Oh, well, you've spoken of Geoffrey Howe's bile.
Oh, indeed, how else would you describe that speech? It was the best speech he ever gave, as I pointed out.
In the book?
Yes.
There is a perception, though, I think, in some quarters, that you didn't go graciously.
I am not responsible for perception in other quarters.
No, you are not.
If I might say so, I saw my successor in, did everything I could to support him in because I thought he was the best of the three, and went, if I might say, I thought very graciously. I don't understand where your perception came from.
Can you talk to us about what it's like suddenly ceasing to be Prime Minister of the UK after 11 and a half years? For example, the day after. I mean, is there a vacuum in your life at that point?
Well, there's no vacuum in my life because we had difficulty in coping with all of the incoming requests and mail. We just did. We had to set up an office. And fortunately, some of my friends already had an office set up for me, and some people came with me and worked with me. And we've struggled ever since on a very, very small staff.
But in terms of your ability
keep on
to make,
top of it all.
But in terms of your ability to direct the way a country is going through history, to make decisions.
Look, that goes. That goes.
And
Someone else has that.
Is that a big sense of loss?
You do not have power, but you have influence. And influence is very important.
But was there a sense of loss?
If you come into... Yes, there is a sense of change. Of course there is. But don't forget, when I came into power, someone else went out. And you must accept and play by the rules of the game. But life didn't end.
Did your colleagues change towards you when you were no longer powerful?
Oh, I expect so. Of course they did.
Did you notice it?
They looked... No, they're the ones who had always been with me, were extremely courteous and extremely thoughtful and very kind. Of course they do. Of course they do, and so does everyone else.
Does the party
Prime Minister is the Prime Minister is the Prime Minister. And the power goes to the Prime Minister.
She was able to tell Middle Britain what she wanted. No mucking around. She's the sort of... It's like most British politicians speak as though they were ordering a menu in French. And she was down there. She was actually at McDonald's telling them she wanted a Big Mac.
She wiped out the trade unions. She brought taxation down to a level that the words brain drain just disappeared. But most of all, she made your man standing in the pub with a pint of beer say, "I'm proud to be British."
She made it colourful, lively, exciting, and in all that sense, I think she's gone bonkers now, over the top, but I would that she was still Prime Minister.
When I went in, Britain didn't count. She was a country not only in decline, but had accepted decline. I came out. Britain was not in decline. She had led the world on rolling back socialism. She'd led the world on what to do and how to do it. And she'd also been the first country in the world to say that aggression should not pay. The first country in the world to uphold international law.
Can a leader get to the point of identifying herself or himself with the country of which they are the leader?
Oh yes, I was identified very much with it.
Did you identify yourself with Britain or as Britain?
With Britain.
What I'm asking is, did you get to the point ever where you started to think, I'm essential?
Good heavens, no. I'm a politician. I've been a politician for 33 years. I know how it works.